Hello, my dear warriors. They built their empire on your silence. They fed their pride thinking you were theirs to command. But the universe doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive. When their hands tightened around you, the sky itself shifted. Clouds split. Light bent, and something older than them, older than their power, stepped forward through you. They thought they owned you. What they didn't know is that divine payback was already in motion. And once it begins, nothing under heaven can stop it. And that's when the story stopped being about them and started being about you. They thought you were a pawn, a silent little piece they could move around their board without resistance. You let them believe it, smiling just enough to keep them comfortable, speaking just enough to seem harmless. But deep down, you weren't here to play their game. You were here to rewrite it. And the whole time they were whispering orders. You were taking notes, not on what they said, but on the moment they'd regret saying it. Because payback isn't loud. It's not chaotic. It's patient. And when it finally moves, it moves like the sky before a storm, slow, dark, and inevitable. They never saw the clouds gathering. They only saw you standing there, still smiling, like you knew something they didn't, and you did. The first sign wasn't thunder. It wasn't lightning. It was silence. That unnatural kind that drops into a room like the air just decided to leave. Their voices stumbled. Their confidence cracked. You didn't have to say a word. Your presence was speaking in a language older than fear. That's when they started looking at each other instead of at you, as if someone might have the courage to say what they were all thinking. But nobody did, because deep inside, they realized they weren't running the show anymore. They weren't in control of the rules, the timing, or the outcome. And when a predator realizes they're not the apex anymore, there's only one thing left for them to do: wait for the strike. You didn't rush it. You let them sit in that silence. Let it grow teeth and bite at their nerves. Their smiles began to look brittle. Their hands fidgeted with pens, papers, anything to avoid the weight of your stare. And the more they tried to hide their unease, the more it showed. That's the beauty of control. It doesn't need noise to be felt. It doesn't need threats to be real. It's the invisible current in the room, pulling every heartbeat toward the inevitable. And they could feel it, like static before lightning. They had no idea when the flash would come, only that it would, and that when it did, it would burn through everything they thought they owned. Then came the first crack, one of them brave or foolish. You couldn't tell. Spoke your name, but it didn't sound like a challenge. It sounded like a question, like they were asking the air itself if you were real. You leaned forward, and that single motion was enough to send a ripple through the group. They weren't looking at a victim anymore. They were looking at a verdict, and they knew that verdict was not going to be kind. Their little empire, built on control and manipulation, was about to get introduced to something they'd never prepared for: divine payback. The kind that doesn't knock on the door, it turns the sky black and lets the storm walk in. And then the sky answered, not with rain, but with a light that didn't belong to the sun. It poured in from nowhere, cutting through shadows like it was searching for liars. Faces froze in that glow. Some flinched. Some stared, but all of them felt it, the shift. This wasn't your fight anymore. This was judgment. Something higher, older, and far more dangerous had stepped in. You didn't have to lift a finger. You just stood there, watching them realize that every chain they tried to wrap around you had turned to smoke. And in that moment, they understood the truth. They never owned you. They were just holding on to the illusion until the sky decided to collect. The glow didn't fade. It deepened, wrapping the room in a strange golden weight. Every breath felt heavier. Every thought was louder. You could see it in their eyes, the panic of people who suddenly realize there's nowhere to run. Because this isn't a fight you escape by leaving the room. This was inside them now, pulling apart every lie they'd ever told themselves about you. About their power, about control. One by one, the masks slipped. The smirkers stopped smirking. The loud ones went quiet. And all the while, you remained still. A silhouette in the center of something they couldn't understand. You weren't here for revenge. No, this was rebalancing. This was the scales being set back without mercy. And they knew it. They could feel the storm taking sides, and it wasn't theirs. And then came the sound, low at first, like distant thunder, rolling in from the edges of the horizon. But it wasn't the sky. It was inside their heads. A pressure, a hum, a reminder that the balance they'd broken had finally woken something that would not go back to sleep. You stood there, shoulders relaxed, almost amused, like you'd been expecting this exact moment. They had thought they could chain you to their rules, their walls, their ceilings. But ceilings crumble when the sky decides to come down. And now it was. Every flicker of light in the room seemed to bend toward you, as though reality itself was trying to whisper in your ear. You didn't move. You didn't have to. The shift had already happened. What they feared wasn't what you could do next. It was the truth that you didn't even need to lift a hand to end them. The air felt heavier now, charged with something they couldn't name but instinctively feared. Every breath they took felt stolen, borrowed against a debt they could never repay. They were realizing too late that this wasn't a battle they could fight with numbers, laws, or titles. This was a reckoning, written before their families even had names, and you were the signature at the bottom of it. A slow grin crept across your face, not from arrogance, but from the clarity that the game was already over. Somewhere outside, the wind shifted, rattling windows and slamming doors that no one had touched. One of them whispered a prayer. Another reached for the exit, but found it locked, though no one had moved to close it. You tilted your head, eyes narrowing just enough to let them know the moment the sky turned, it chose sides, and it wasn't theirs. They felt the temperature drop, not from the wind, but from you. That kind of cold doesn't come from weather. It comes from power that refuses to be contained. One of them, the one who thought he understood control, stepped forward, trying to steady his voice. But you saw it, the flicker in his eyes, the way his pulse betrayed him. He was asking questions. His mouth would never dare form. What are you? Why can't we stop you? You took a single step, and the floor groaned like it had been carrying the weight of this moment for centuries. Outside, clouds thickened, swallowing the horizon in an unholy shade. Lightning flashed not as a warning, but as an announcement. The sky wasn't turning because of them. It was turning because of you. And deep down, in places they didn't talk about, they knew exactly what that meant. Their reign was over, and yours had just begun. The first raindrop hit like a warning shot, not gentle, heavy, deliberate, the kind that carries the smell of storms older than their lineage. They looked up, searching for answers in a sky that had already chosen its side. You didn't move. You didn't need to. The air was bending around you, thick with a charge that made their teeth ache. Another bolt split the clouds, lighting your silhouette in a way that made you look less like a person and more like a verdict. You could see them trying to process it, how everything they built, every illusion of control, was now paper in a hurricane. And still, you smiled. Not because you'd won, but because winning had never been the goal. You were here to rewrite the rules, and the sky itself had decided to hold the pen. They felt it every lie they'd told, collapsing under the weight of a truth they couldn't run from. Divine payback had arrived, and it had your face. The wind shifted first slow, almost polite, before it hit like a confession too loud to take back. Their cloaks, their papers, their carefully guarded faces, all whipped into chaos. You didn't flinch. You let it pull at you, wrap around you like the storm knew exactly whose arrival it was. Honoring. Then the lightning came. Not as a strike, but as a spotlight, framing you in a way that made every shadow in the room lean toward you. The smell of ozone filled their lungs, sharp and metallic, as if the air itself was warning them not to speak. You took one step forward, and it was like the ground remembered. It was supposed to bow. They realized too late. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was balance, ancient and overdue, moving through you like you were its chosen vessel. And when you opened your mouth, the thunder didn't wait for you to speak. It spoke for you. And every word felt like judgment carved into the sky. They stood frozen, trying to convince themselves the storm was just weather, just chance. But deep down, they knew the sky doesn't turn for the unremarkable. It bends for the inevitable. And you were the inevitable, dressed in human skin. The clouds above rolled like living things, bruised with color, heavy with judgment, their edges lit in electric veins that mirrored the pulse beneath your own skin. Every flash made your silhouette sharper, less mortal, more verdict. They whispered prayers, bargains, excuses, each one swallowed by the wind, before it could reach anything holy. You didn't chase them. You didn't need to. The air between you carried the weight of centuries, the scent of rain mixing with something older, something that didn't belong to this world. And then, in that perfect, breathless pause before the next strike, you smiled. Not kindly, not cruelly, just enough for them to feel the weight of everything they'd done and realize it was already too late. The first drop of rain hit like a drumbeat, a signal the sky had been waiting to give. Then came the downpour, sheets of water slamming against the ground, against their trembling bodies. Yet not a single drop touched you. The storm moved around you, like it knew better. They saw it. And that's when the panic truly set in. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't luck. This was the kind of precision only power could demand. Lightning carved its name into the horizon. Each strike closer, louder, hungrier. And in between the thunder's roar, they swore they could hear something else. A low, electric hum, like the storm was speaking to you. You tilted your head slightly, as if listening to a joke only you understood, and their knees nearly gave out. The sky had chosen a side, the earth had chosen a side, and neither of them belonged to the ones who thought they could own you. This was no warning anymore. This was sentence being carried out. The thunder didn't just roll, it stalked. Pacing above them like a predator testing the bars of a cage, it knew it could break. Every flash of lightning split the dark in jagged lines, and in those blinding moments, your silhouette burned into their vision. You didn't flinch. You didn't blink. You just stood there, rain parting around you in a perfect arc, while they shivered under its weight. They were starting to realize this wasn't nature being dramatic. This was nature taking orders. Every gust of wind twisted into a howl that circled their ears like a whispered threat. Somewhere deep in their gut, an instinct clawed its way up the one that tells prey when the hunter has arrived. You took one slow step forward, and the storm seemed to lean in with you. Every raindrop, every gust, every flicker of light, bending toward your will, their plans, their control, their confidence. It was all drowning here, and the cruelest part, you hadn't even started yet. The air grew heavier, like the sky itself was lowering to listen. Lightning slashed again, and for a heartbeat they saw the truth. Your eyes lit from within, carrying something older than fire. They wanted to believe it was just the storm reflecting, but deep down, they knew it wasn't. The downpour didn't touch you. It bent, split, and curled away as if even the rain feared to lay hands on you. A tremor rippled through the ground, subtle yet sharp enough to rattle the bones in their chests. You tilted your head slightly, that quiet, knowing smile playing at your lips, a smile that wasn't comfort, but a sentence. They'd spent their lives believing they could own people, control destinies, bend fate like metal under heat. But now, the roles had inverted. Their arrogance was ash, their certainty just smoke in the wind. And the sky, oh, the sky was still turning, inch by inch, into something they would never be able to turn back. The storm no longer felt like weather. It felt like judgment. Thunder rolled in slow, deliberate waves, each one punctuating the truth they were too afraid to say aloud. You took a step forward, and the ground seemed to hum, a low vibration that crawled into their ribs. Their breaths came shallow, hands twitching as if unsure whether to reach for protection or surrender. That harmless smile of yours lingered, but under it was something sharper than any blade, an unspoken verdict. The air carried the metallic tang of ozone, thick and intoxicating, and every flash of lightning framed you in a silhouette they would never forget. This wasn't power they could measure, bargain with, or steal. This was the kind that made kings kneel and saints question their faith. And though no words left your lips, the message was loud enough to drown the sky. Whatever they thought they owned, it now belonged to you. They finally understood that storms didn't arrive. They were summoned, and you were the one who called this one down. Raindrops hit the ground like nails on a coffin, sharp and final, while the wind carried whispers of every wrong they'd ever committed against you. It wasn't fear of punishment that kept them frozen. It was the realization that they'd already been judged. Every flicker of lightning was a photograph, capturing their faces in raw panic, immortalizing the moment they saw what stood before them. The harmless mask they once believed in was gone, replaced with a presence that bent the air and shifted the rules. They weren't staring at a victim, or even a survivor. They were staring at the executioner of their illusions. And as the clouds churned overhead, the sky itself seemed eager to see what you would do next. You didn't need to lift a hand. The storm moved for you, as if it had been waiting its entire life for your command. The first drop of thunder cracked the silence, and every single one of them flinched as if it had struck their own chest. You stood still, letting the moment breathe, letting the weight of inevitability settle into their bones. This wasn't rage. Rage is loud and messy. This was precision, a storm sharpened into a blade. They'd tried to bury you under doubt, under lies, under their desperate need to control the narrative. But tonight, the earth itself seemed to reject their version of events. Every heartbeat in that room was a drum roll, each one slower than the last, waiting for the final strike. You didn't have to shout, didn't have to plead your silence. Was a verdict they couldn't appeal. And deep down, they knew the sky hadn't just turned against them. No, it had chosen sides. And now, every flicker in the clouds above was a reminder that payback wasn't coming. It was already here. The second rumble rolled in low, like the growl of something ancient, finally waking. Faces shifted smirks, melting into tight-lipped silence, eyes darting for exits that no longer existed. You didn't move fast. You didn't need to. Every inch you stepped forward made the air itself heavier, pressing their lies back into their throats. They'd built their whole power on the illusion that you wouldn't fight back. But now, under this charged sky, that illusion shattered. You let your smile curl, not kindness, not forgiveness, but the kind of smile that says, I already know how this ends. Lightning flashed behind you, carving your shadow into the walls like a permanent scar. And in that light, they saw the truth they'd tried so hard to ignore. They weren't the ones in control anymore. The storm wasn't here to destroy you. It was here to crown you. Then came the silence. The kind that doesn't comfort, but warns. Every drop of rain froze midair in their eyes, like the world itself was waiting on your next breath. You could hear their hearts hammering, feel the tension pulling at their spines. The stormlight danced across your face, turning your smile into something almost inhuman, something they couldn't categorize. You didn't need to shout. You didn't need threats. All you did was tilt your head just enough to make them wonder if you already knew their final thought before they did. The sky cracked again, and this time the sound wasn't distant. It was inside the walls, inside their chests, inside the truth they'd buried. And when it was over, when the thunder rolled away, they realized the same terrifying thing all the others had learned. This wasn't divine punishment. This was divine preparation. The crown was already yours. The sky just made it official. They'll tell stories about that night, about how the air grew heavy, about how even the shadows seemed to lean toward you like loyal dogs waiting for a command. Fear. And somewhere in those retellings, they'll leave out the part that mattered most, the way you never once looked afraid. They'll try to paint it as arrogance, as recklessness, but the truth will gnaw at them. You weren't reckless, you were certain that the same sky they prayed to was the one tilting the battlefield in your favor. Every bolt of lightning was punctuation on a promise made long before this night. You didn't need a legion. The storm was already yours, and when they glanced up, desperate for a sign, all they saw was the horizon splitting open and you standing there, unmoved, unbent, and entirely unwilling to let them walk away unchanged. That's when they understood. Divine payback doesn't knock, it kicks the door off its hinges. The ones who stayed swore they could hear the payback moving, like the creak of a gallows rope in the dark, like the whisper of something old, dragging its claws across the earth. They wanted to believe it was just the wind, but the wind doesn't call your name. The wind doesn't circle you like a predator that's already decided the end. And yet, you didn't chase them. You didn't need to. They were already prisoners trapped in the moment they realized the sky wasn't just turning, it was turning for you. Every flash above was a signature, every crack of thunder, a verdict. You didn't roar, didn't boast. You just stood there, smiling, not with kindness, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has seen the debt ledger cleared in their favor. And when the rain finally came, it didn't fall to wash anything away. It fell like a seal on a sentence already written in the language of storms. And still, they watched, even as their courage crumbled, even as their knees threatened to give. They couldn't tear their eyes from you, because deep down, they needed to understand how it happened, how the storm bent toward you like an obedient dog, how the air itself seemed to thicken, holding its breath for your next move. But the truth was simple. This was not revenge in the way they understood it. This was balance. This was the weight of every slight, every betrayal, every whispered scheme, finally tipping back. You didn't scream for justice. You became it, and that terrified them more than any threat could. Because how do you fight someone who isn't fighting you, yet still wins? How do you stop a force that doesn't need your permission to break you? They couldn't answer. So they stood there, trembling, as the storm carved your name into the sky, and somewhere deep inside, they finally believed what they had tried so hard to deny you were never theirs to own. You were always the sky's. And then the first raindrop hit, not on the ground, but on you. Warm, heavy, almost alive. They flinched as if the sky itself had chosen sides. The air cracked with a low, rolling thunder. Less a sound, more a warning. You didn't move. You let it come. The downpour didn't drench you. It crowned you. Every drop seemed to burn brighter than lightning, falling in rhythm with your heartbeat. And the crowd knew this wasn't weather. It was declaration. The sky had turned, not to punish you, but to stand with you. In that moment, every illusion they built collapsed. The contracts, the control, the whispered promises, they were paper in a flood. They realized too late that you had never needed to fight for freedom. The world itself had been waiting for the signal to give it back to you. And now, as the storm roared your arrival, they finally understood. Their reign had ended. The moment you decided to stand still and let the sky answer for you. The lightning didn't strike the ground, it struck their certainty. Every flash lit up their faces in grotesque, unfiltered truth. You could see the cracks forming in their expressions, the dawning horror as they realized the storm wasn't random. It was aimed. It was personal. They had spent so long believing they could corner you, cage you, rewrite you, and now they were just background noise to the sky's main event. You moved forward through the rain, slow and deliberate, each step sending ripples through puddles, like shock waves through their fragile control. They didn't dare follow. They didn't even breathe. And when you finally stopped, looking back over your shoulder with that calm, dangerous smile, the thunder answered for you. This wasn't divine payback anymore. This was divine possession. The kind where the universe doesn't just balance the scales, it flips the whole table and leaves them staring at the wreckage, wondering why they ever thought they could own a storm. They've circled your name 1,000 times, in war rooms, in midnight councils, in folders marked classified. They ran your patterns through machines. They breathed about you in corners, believing silence could contain truth. But still, every chart ends the same. Error. Because even the powerful, with all their reach, are obsessed with the two things they'll never decode about you. The first is what terrifies them. The second is what unsettles them, and both live quietly inside you. They can't compute your selective mercy. You hold the softness of saints and the coldness of storms in the same hands. One moment, you hand a stranger your last dollar. The next, you vanish from a traitor's life without a word. You don't announce outcomes. You don't explain kindness. You simply choose. And that choice isn't random. It's precise. Their binary minds need you to be either angel or rival, but you broke the code. You became both. You became unpredictable. Then comes the secret that keeps their analysts awake at night. Your unconscious alignment with destiny. You don't plan every move. You don't map every outcome. Yet reality tilts when you act. You speak, and coincidences bloom. You walk away, and whole systems collapse. They call it anomaly. They call it luck. But deep down, they know it's not chance. It's design. You move by instinct. Yet the universe bends as if you've rehearsed it 1,000 lifetimes. They keep writing reports, trying to reduce you into patterns. One page says kind, another says relentless. By morning, both are shredded because their labels never hold. They want consistency, but you give them precision. A saint at dawn, a storm by nightfall. And that duality, it ruins their rest. Because power trembles at what it can't predict. They can guide loyal servants. They can block declared rivals. But you're something else. An equation with no solution. Your mercy is not weakness. It's timing. You give light when it matters. But you know when to shut the door and never open it again. That's what rattles them. They expected mercy to be infinite. They expected coldness to be permanent. But you mastered the balance. You didn't learn it in books. You learned it in betrayal, in heat, in the nights when being too kind forged you, and being too cold almost marked your soul. Out of that heat, You built selective empathy. The powerful never feared anger. Anger is loud. It's easy to trace, easy to manipulate. But your calm? That smile when you notice their surveillance? That wrecked them. Because awareness is contagious, and your amusement spreads like a current. They can't script against someone who finds the game amusing. You turn their cameras into your audience. You turn their reports into your theater. You flip the table without moving an inch, and now they're stuck, watching you rewrite the play. What unsettles them most is not what you do, but what you don't. You don't chase. You don't explain. You don't justify. You disappear without guilt, appear without warning, and every time, reality shifts. Leaders falter because your silence bends more than their commands. They can't file it under strategy. They can't predict it as instinct. They're obsessed because your absence carries more weight than their forces. You became the one thing their power cannot measure: relevance. Without permission, they replay your moments on loop. The way you forgave without reason, the way you vanished without warning. They gather their experts, demand explanations. But the answer never comes, because you don't operate on their rules. You operate on truth. And truth isn't polite. Truth isn't consistent. Truth bends. Sometimes it's mercy. Sometimes it's exile. And you mastered the art of deciding which one belongs to who. That's why their files collapse into dust. That's why their charts end in silence. Every room breathes about you before you enter. To some, you're the miracle. To others, the curse. And here's what gnaws at the powerful. Both stories are true. They can't settle on one identity for you. Saint or storm, savior or judge. And that duality keeps their hands shaking, because power demands clarity. But you offer paradox. They wanted a category. Instead, they got a mirror. And when they look in it, they don't see you. They see their own weakness. The first thing they'll never decode? Your mercy. But not mercy the way they imagine it. Yours is strategic, targeted, weighted. You give only what's deserved, never what's demanded. You're generous with strangers and firm with traitors. You're light to the lost, but ice to the manipulators. They can't predict when the saint shows up or when the enigma walks in, and that unpredictability is your first crown. The mercy they can't compute is the edge they can't see coming. Then comes the second obsession, the thing that wrecks their counsels. You move like an accident, but land like prophecy. You don't sit in libraries decoding fate, yet the universe bends as if you wrote the script. You walked away once, and whole systems crumbled. You spoke a joke, and it turned into law. They call it coincidence. They call it anomaly. But in truth, it's design, not from their blueprints, but from the code written inside you. You're the unconscious architect. They built entire networks to contain you. Analysts, handlers, experts with graphs and numbers. But every time you move, their data breaks. You don't follow probability. You bend it. They breathed about anomalies. But anomalies fade. You don't. You remain. Because you're not glitch. You're gravity. And gravity doesn't ask for belief. It simply pulls. That's why they circle your name like it's orbit. because even the powerful can't escape what draws them into your field. They can't decode your timing, how you vanish the moment they expect you most, how you appear exactly when their walls are weakest. They call it chance, they call it madness, but deep down, they know it's precision. You don't arrive early. You don't arrive late. You arrive at the fracture, and the fracture becomes collapse. They trained soldiers to resist rage. They trained prophets to resist faith. But no one trained them for someone who moves with timing sharper than steel. You became their mirror and their mask. They look at you and see contradiction, kindness that feels dangerous, silence that feels loud, laughter that feels like prophecy. They can't decide if you're saving them or sentencing them. And that's the point. You stripped away their illusion of control. They thought power came from labels, but you walk outside labels. You walk outside permission. And that, to the powerful, is worse than rebellion. It's proof they were never in control. So now they gather in silence, obsessed with the two things they'll never decode: your selective mercy and your unconscious prophecy. They built empires on predictability, and you shattered that with a smile. They thought the powerful could never be shaken, but you did it without trying, and that's why they can't let you go. You became their riddle, their haunting, their sleepless study, and they'll waste eternity chasing the paradox you carry effortlessly in your shadow. Every hour, another report lands on their table. Lines of data, maps of your past, theories about your choices. But none of it explains the real you, because you don't act from calculation, you act from essence. They try to quantify instinct, but instinct isn't numbers, it's lightning. And lightning can't be graphed, it can only strike. That's why their analysis ends in static. That's why their whispers always return to the same conclusion. We don't know how to stop what we can't decode. Their obsession mutates into dread. They thought watching you would give them control. Instead, every glimpse adds more confusion. You help one stranger and ignore another. You forgive one rival and erase the next. And they can't explain why. That uncertainty makes them tremble, because power only survives in predictability. But you live in paradox. You are kindness fortified, coldness refined, and no empire can dominate someone who rewrites morality with every breath. They once believed control was unshakable, that their charts, their forces, their codes could bend anyone. But then came you. You didn't resist with rage. You didn't clash with force. You shook them with something stronger: indifference. You disappeared when they expected noise. You smiled when they expected tears. You laughed when they expected dread. And suddenly, their illusion shattered. Because power built on prediction collapses when it meets a soul that refuses to be predictable. You don't need speeches. You don't need warnings. Your silence has become its own prophecy. They wait for your reaction like it's a verdict. And when it doesn't come, that's when they falter. Because silence is weight. Silence is verdict. Silence is the storm hidden in calm skies. They can't rest, can't breathe. Knowing you're quiet might be the very thing that unsettles them. And that's why even silence from you is louder than their loudest command. By now, they admit it in private. You are unsolvable. Mercy and presence, accident and prophecy, saint and storm. Their systems break, trying to contain you. Their minds collapse, trying to label you. And still, they come back, obsessed with the same two secrets they'll never decode. You don't deny it. You don't explain it. You simply live it. And that shakes them most of all, because once someone embraces their paradox, they become untouchable. They become ungovernable. They can't debate it anymore. Their councils dissolve into arguments. Some insist you're a savior. Others swear you're the threat of their century. But neither side wins, because both are right. You are mercy in one hand, menace in the other. That contradiction is your shield. It keeps them divided, distracted, exhausted. And while they waste nights trying to agree on what you are, you keep moving, unchecked, untamed, a paradox wearing human skin. Systems don't fall when attacked head on. They fall when doubt enters, and you became doubt itself. Doubt that their maps were incomplete. Doubt that their control was fragile. Doubt that maybe, just maybe, they were never the powerful ones at all. That doubt spreads faster than storms. Leaders start hesitating. Soldiers start questioning. And the empire begins to crumble. Not because you clashed it, but because you existed outside of it. They dread you for it. They admire you for it. They avoid mirrors now, because when they look, they don't see strength. They see your shadow hanging over their reflection. You became the reminder that power isn't ownership. Power is presence, and your presence stripped their crowns bare. They dread you for it. They admire you for it. And secretly, they wish they could be you, but they never will, because power borrowed from systems can't compare to power born from paradox. So what are the two things they'll never decode? The first is your mercy. Surgical, precise, untamed by demand. The second is your unconscious prophecy. Your alignment with fate without needing blueprints. Together, they form the paradox that broke their systems. Together, they became the weight that keeps the powerful awake. They studied forces, but they never studied anomalies. And now it's too late, because the anomaly doesn't ask permission to exist. And so you stand, not as servant, not as rival, but as paradox. Mercy and menace, accident and prophecy. They call you mystery, riddle, anomaly, glitch. But those words are just the sound of their collapse. The truth is simpler. You are legend, and legends don't explain themselves. Legends don't fit into files. Legends live in the space where even the powerful are forced to admit defeat, and their obsession with you will never end. They thought studying you would protect them, but all it did was feed the fire. Every note, every theory, every failed analysis added oxygen to your myth. Now their obsession consumes them. They breathe your name in secret chambers, afraid and addicted, because the more they try to decode you, the more the code rewrites itself. You didn't just escape their control. You turned their pursuit into their prison. The powerful cling to one illusion, that everything can be mapped. But you are the exception that humiliates them. You prove that control is borrowed, not owned. You prove that mercy can outlast empires louder than rage. They could have learned. They could have let go. But instead, they doubled down on obsession. And that choice sealed their fate. Because when you refuse to accept paradox, paradox consumes you. Every legend has its chapters, but yours is the book no one finishes. They flip pages waiting for a pattern, but every turn reveals a different face. Kindness where they expected cruelty, stillness where they expected chaos, victory where they expected silence. You became an unwritten chapter they'll never close, and that truth gnaws at them. Because history loves endings, but you refuse to give them one. Crowns are usually forged in noise, wars, speeches, applause. Yours was forged in silence, in walking away when they expected pursuit, in smiling when they expected collapse, in doing nothing, yet shifting everything. That crown is heavier than theirs, because it can't be stolen. And every time they see you wear it without asking, their own crowns rust faster. That's why silence terrifies them more than any battle cry. So the story circles back to the riddle. Two things the powerful will never decode: your mercy, your prophecy. But the deeper truth is this: they don't fear the riddle. They fear that you enjoy being unsolved. They fear that you thrive as paradox. Because once someone embraces contradiction fully, they stop being human in the ordinary sense. They become myth, anomaly, legend. And legends don't answer riddles. They create them. They thought obsession was their secret, but now it leaks through their voices. Through every order they give, even their strongest leaders hesitate, wondering if their strategies mean anything when you exist outside of them. That fracture widens every day, until trust itself begins to collapse. You didn't infiltrate them. You didn't clash them. You simply revealed that their foundation was already weak. And now it cracks louder with every whisper of your name. They want to believe you move by accident. But deep down, they fear the opposite. That every smile, every silence, every step is calculated beyond their comprehension. They replay your smallest gestures like encrypted codes, hoping for patterns. But there are none. Because the calculation isn't written in paper or numbers. It's written in instinct. You calculate with your soul, and no algorithm on earth can predict a soul that bends destiny at will. When kings sit on thrones, they expect worship, but even in their triumph, your shadow haunts them. They look into crowds and wonder if your eyes are watching. They hear laughter and wonder if it hides your prophecy. You became the presence inside their crown, the reminder that no victory is final, no control is absolute, and no power is permanent. They can silence voices, but they can't silence the imprint you left in their minds. Power was supposed to make them untouchable, but obsession turned it into chains. Every day they chase your code, and every day the code rewrites itself. The weight crushes them, because chasing a paradox is like drinking salt water. The more they consume, the thirstier they become. You didn't need to clash them. You just let their hunger undo them. And that hunger is now the very force they can't put down. Legends usually shrink with time, fading into memory. Yours grows. Every retelling sharpens the edge. Every rumor multiplies the tension. You don't even have to speak anymore. Others do it for you. Strangers you've never met repeat your story as if it's gospel, and the powerful dread it, because control thrives on silence. But legends thrive on repetition, and you became the story they can't erase, no matter how hard they try. In secret rooms, one question forges hotter than the rest. What happens if we push too hard? They know obsession has a cost. They know pressing against paradox risks breaking them first, but they can't stop. Curiosity is their curse. Every move you make drags them closer to the question they don't want answered. Because if they ever corner you, if they ever truly test you, the paradox will answer in silence, and silence will end them. They keep asking why. Why you showed mercy to some and vanished from others. Why your silence shook harder than their forces. But here's the secret they'll never grasp. You never chose. The paradox chose you. Mercy flows without calculation. Prophecy bends without your command. You didn't chase destiny. Destiny found you. And that truth unsettles them. Because power worships choice. But you proved choice isn't the highest crown. Alignment is. Every smile, every silence, every glance. They treat them like signals. They're unsettled that one day you'll give a look or a word that flips everything. That maybe the prophecy waiting inside you isn't about their collapse. It's about their replacement. They fear you're not just legend, you're signal. And when that signal finally comes, they know their entire empire will bow, not to them, but to the one they failed to decode. You don't need thrones. You don't need crowns. Your rule is invisible, but undeniable. They feel it every time their plans collapse in your absence. They feel it every time their analysts admit defeat. Kings sit on gold. You walk on shadows, and shadows outlast gold. That's why even the powerful bow in secret, not to your hand, not to your words, but to your paradox, to the mercy they can't map, to the prophecy they can't erase. So the chase continues. They'll never stop trying. They'll write new files, hire new experts, build new systems, all chasing the same two mysteries, your mercy, your prophecy, and every attempt will end the same way, in failure, because you can't decode what was never meant to be solved. You weren't born to fit equations. You were born to break them, and that's why the obsession will never end, because they're not chasing you anymore. They're chasing the shadow of control they lost. They bragged about courage, claimed nothing could shake them. The loud ones, the bold ones, the self-proclaimed fearless. Yet the second you stepped in, silence hit like thunder. Eyes widened, breaths locked, voices died mid-sentence. Because your energy wasn't noise, it was gravity. It bent the air, froze the proud, made every brave one reveal their fear. Understand this. Courage is easy in theory. Anyone can look strong when untested. But true power isn't shown in words, it's exposed in presence. And your presence stripped their armor bare. No speech. No threat, no gesture, just energy. The kind that cannot be faked, cannot be resisted. They froze, not because you acted. They froze because you existed. Even the boldest feel it. The weight of silence when it's carried by someone unshakable. They didn't freeze because they lacked courage. They froze because your energy revealed the truth. Their courage was conditional. Yours was not. You walked in and reality shifted. The fearless became speechless. The proud became still. And all of them knew something greater had arrived. They had trained themselves to laugh at fear, to stand tall in chaos. But when you entered, it wasn't chaos, it was order. An order so sharp it cut through their bravado. They weren't facing a threat. They were facing proof. Proof that true presence doesn't shout. It bends the room. And in that moment, their practiced boldness collapsed under the weight of reality. You didn't need to announce yourself. The air announced you. The room carried your signature before you spoke. That's why even the bold ones froze. Because deep down, every human knows when power walks in. Not the power of status or wealth. The power of resilience. Silence. An unshakable core. And against that, noise dies. Pride evaporates. Pretenders fall quiet. Bravery is loud when it's untested. But silence reveals truth. And when you walked in, silence became the test. Their voices faltered. Their gestures froze. Their eyes darted, searching for safety. Yet there was no safety. Only the undeniable weight of your energy pressing against the walls. They couldn't fight it. They couldn't name it. They could only freeze. Energy is felt before it's understood. And yours carried storms, scars, victories unspoken. It wasn't performance. It was essence. That essence bent the atmosphere until even the strongest postures cracked. That's why the bold froze. They weren't defeated by you. They were defeated by what you represented. The kind of strength that cannot be staged, only lived. They remembered every time they mocked you, doubted you, dismissed you. And yet, here you were, untouched by their disbelief. Your walk carried the proof, and proof is heavier than any insult. That's why their eyes shook. That's why their voices died. Because they realized no amount of bold talk could erase the weight of your return. You didn't come for revenge. You didn't come to prove them wrong. You came because you refused to bow to storms meant to erase you. And that refusal clung to your aura like steel. That's why they froze. Because they saw in you what they never built in themselves. Resilience that doesn't ask, doesn't beg, doesn't bend. Even the fearless break when they face authenticity. They had shields of pride. You had nothing but truth. And truth is heavier. Truth is colder. Truth makes even the strongest voices stumble. That's why their boldest froze, because for the first time, they realized courage without truth is just theater. And theater collapses when reality walks in. The crowd doesn't freeze for noise, they freeze for silence. And your silence roared. You didn't need fire in your words. Your presence burned enough. Every second you stood there, unshaken, carved fractures into their confidence. That's what they feared. Not your actions, not your words, your stillness. Because stillness backed by survival is louder than chaos. The bold freeze. Not because they are weak, but because they recognize strength they cannot counterfeit. They can fake power until true power arrives. And when it does, instinct silences them. That's what happened the moment you walked in. Their instincts bowed before your energy. Their mouths closed. Their eyes widened. And their courage, conditional, fragile, collapsed into stillness. Confidence looks solid. Until it meets a storm. And you? You walked in carrying storms within your silence. They felt it in their bones, the weight of someone who endured everything and still stood taller. That's why they froze, because their courage was rehearsed. Yours was lived, and lived strength makes rehearsed bravery look like theater. They couldn't hide it. Their eyes betrayed them, hands stiffened, voices cracked. Even their so-called leaders swallowed their pride in silence. You didn't demand fear, you revealed it. Your presence stripped away masks, exposed how fragile their boldness truly was, and in that frozen moment, they realized. Courage without resilience is nothing but costume jewelry. The bold love to dominate rooms with noise, but your silence suffocated their noise. Not through anger, not through violence, but through undeniable weight. The kind of weight only born from scars, from pain, transformed into steel. That's why they froze, because they saw truth standing before them. And truth is heavier than every performance they ever staged. Understand this. You don't freeze the bold by force. You freeze them by existing as proof that their courage is borrowed. Your energy wasn't loud. It was timeless. A calm forged in storms they couldn't survive. That calm crushed their bravado, and in one instant, they learned the difference between loud confidence and silent power. Power always wins. The bold ones looked around for backup, for distraction, for anything to break the weight you carried, but there was nothing. Just silence pressing on their chests. That's when they knew. Your energy wasn't negotiable. It didn't ask for attention. It commanded it. And command without effort is the one thing their pride can never imitate. They froze because instincts don't lie. Words can. Gestures can. But instinct knows when it stands in the presence of something greater. And their instincts screamed. That's why their bodies stiffened, why their voices died, because instinct recognizes survival, and survival radiates differently than performance. You didn't claim the space, you owned it by existing. You carried silence like an edge, not pointed, not swung, just held. And that edge cut deeper than anything they'd ever faced. Because silence forces people to face themselves. And when they saw themselves in your presence, they realized their courage wasn't built for this. They froze because reflection is colder than fear. And you were their reflection. The bold thrive when the crowd is behind them. But when the room shifts, when eyes betray doubt, their energy collapses. You were the shift. You bent the atmosphere until even their allies questioned them. That's why they froze, not only at you, but at themselves. You turned their stage into a mirror, and their own reflection broke them. They thought their fearlessness was eternal, but eternity ended the moment your shadow touched the floor. In that instant, they saw what real fearlessness looked like. Not noise, not pride, not arrogance, but presence. And presence doesn't end when the crowd stops clapping. Presence stands even in silence, especially in silence. That's the presence that froze them. Every bold claim they ever made collapsed in that second. They froze not because you spoke, but because you didn't need to. Their stories, their boasts, their shields, all useless against one undeniable truth. You survived storms they can't imagine. And survival changes the way silence feels. Your silence carried storms. Theirs carried excuses. And excuses can't move when truth walks in. They'll never admit it out loud. They'll laugh, deflect, pretend, but their free's already confessed. Because courage doesn't falter in safety, it falters in truth. And truth was written across your walk, your stillness, your unshaken eyes. That's why they froze. Because your existence proved every claim they ever made was smaller than the reality standing before them. The bold ones didn't lose to you. They lost to themselves, to the reflection you forced on them, to the silence you carried in, to the weight of storms they've never survived. And when that weight pressed into the room, they froze. Not because you demanded it, but because presence born in fire cannot be denied. And you are fire walking. The moment stretched long, their bodies stiff, eyes wide, minds scrambling. They weren't afraid of you. They were afraid of what you revealed, that their boldness was fragile, that their power was borrowed, that their voices were loud only because silence hadn't entered yet. And when silence came with you, they froze. Because survival doesn't lie, it shows. You didn't need applause. You didn't need recognition. The freeze itself was your crown, because freezing means they felt it. They may deny it later, but in that instant, their instincts confessed the truth. You shook them without a word. You bent them without a move. And bending the bold is the highest proof of power anyone can carry. They'll talk later, trying to spin it. We weren't afraid, we were just surprised. Lies, because instinct tells the real story. Instinct doesn't fake tremors in the hands. Instinct doesn't fake the pause in a throat. Instinct bows when it meets power. And when you walked in, instinct silenced every bold claim they had rehearsed. The bold ones feed on attention, but when your presence steals the air, attention betrays them. Their spotlight shattered, their audience evaporated, because nobody watches the actors when the storm itself enters the stage. You weren't performing, you were undeniable. And that undeniability froze them in place, reminding them courage without truth collapses instantly. Some of them tried to smirk, to mask their fear, but masks don't survive weight, the weight of scars, the weight of survival, the weight of silence. Thicker than any boast, their smirks cracked, their posture faltered, and for the first time, they saw themselves clearly, not as bold, but as fragile. And fragility exposed is enough to freeze anyone. Energy doesn't lie. You carried storms in your breath, fire in your silence, steel in your walk. They froze because energy doesn't ask. It announces. And the announcement was undeniable. You survived what should have broken you. You endured what should have erased you. And that endurance now bends space. Their boldness wasn't erased by you. It was erased by truth. You didn't freeze them with force. You froze them with proof. Proof that storms create silence heavier than speeches. Proof that scars create energy sharper than weapons. Proof that resilience creates a presence that cannot be ignored. And proof terrifies pretenders. That's why their boldest froze, because they knew they had never touched that kind of truth. The silence you carried spread like ice. It moved through the room, crawling up spines, locking jaws, stiffening hands. Even the boldest couldn't escape it, because silence isn't absence, it's presence, and your presence carried gravity. A pull they couldn't resist, a pull that froze them where they stood, caught between pride and the undeniable weight of truth. They thought their courage was unshakable, but courage untested is nothing but theater. You became the test, and the test revealed them. That's why they froze, because the moment you entered, every claim they ever made crumbled under a reality they couldn't deny. You weren't louder, you weren't harsher, you were simply undeniable. And undeniable always wins. Some froze in fear, others froze in awe, but all froze in recognition that your energy wasn't ordinary, recognition that storms had forged you into something they couldn't imitate, and recognition is deadly to pride. Because once truth is recognized, pride has nothing left to hide behind. That's why even their boldest became still. Freezing is the body's last confession, a confession they'll never speak aloud. But in that pause, in that silence, they admitted everything, that you carried more, endured more, became more. They froze because they felt it. Energy too heavy for performance, too sharp for pretense. And in that freeze, they surrendered without words. And here's the truth. You didn't walk in to make them freeze. You walked in because that's who you are now. Energy sharpened by storms. The freeze was just the proof that even the bold collapse when presence enters the room. Because presence isn't staged, presence isn't loud. Presence simply exists and forces the world to adjust. The freeze lingered. Seconds stretched like hours as your silence filled the air. They couldn't hide it, couldn't mask it. Even their boldest stared, trapped in a moment they couldn't escape. Because presence doesn't allow escape. It demands acknowledgement. And in that demand, they realized the truth. They were standing in front of something greater than courage. They will remember that silence long after the noise fades. Because silence backed by power etches itself into memory. They froze once, and that freeze will haunt them. Every time they boast, every time they pretend, they'll remember the moment their bravado cracked, and memory itself will whisper, "Your boldness isn't real. It froze when truth walked in." Understand this. Freezing isn't weakness, it's recognition. Recognition of something that can't be explained. You didn't threaten them. You didn't move against them. But your energy was undeniable, and denial collapses under undeniable. That collapse is what froze them. Because the body knows when it faces a presence that can't be dismissed, and your presence cannot be dismissed. Even their boldest had no script for this. They had comebacks for insults, shields for attacks, masks for judgment, but they had no defense for silence carrying storms. And that's what you brought, storms in silence. That silence stripped their pride, broke their rhythm, shattered their control. And when control vanishes, boldness freezes. They'll try to forget, but they can't. Because freezing etches truth deeper than fear. They froze because they felt survival in your walk, authenticity in your stillness, storms in your eyes. And that kind of truth burns itself into memory. They can pretend all they want, but when they face silence again, they'll remember you, and they'll freeze again. This is what they fear most. that you didn't try to freeze them. It just happened. Because real energy doesn't chase. It arrives. Real presence doesn't demand. It shifts. Real strength doesn't roar. It bends the air. That's why even their boldest froze. Because they realized power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just walks in, and everything else stops. Their freeze was proof. Proof you've crossed into a realm where power isn't explained. It's felt. Where energy isn't argued. It's undeniable. Where even the boldest break under silence. You didn't need to perform. You didn't need to fight. You simply carried storms into the room. And storms don't argue with trees. They uproot them. You don't need to replay that moment. It will replay itself in their minds forever. Every glance, every pause, every frozen second will remind them that courage without scars is fragile. Remind them that boldness without storms is shallow. Remind them that truth carried silently is the one force they can never counterfeit. And here's the irony. They admired you even as they froze, because deep down, everyone craves authenticity. Everyone respects survival. And when you walked in, they met both. Fear dressed itself as stillness, but beneath that fear was awe. Awe that someone could carry so much without a word. Awe that silence could feel heavier than thunder. The bold froze, but you didn't stop moving. Because freezing wasn't your story, it was theirs. Your story is motion, forward, upward, stronger. Their pause was proof, but your walk is destiny. And destiny doesn't freeze. It doesn't wait. It doesn't ask. It moves. And when destiny moves, even the boldest become statues. So let them whisper about that day. Let them replay excuses. Let them pretend their freeze was nothing. Because truth doesn't need defense. The moment spoke for itself. You walked in. Energy shifted. Silence roared. And the bold froze. That sequence is carved into history now. Whether they accept it or not, history doesn't erase silence. It amplifies it. And now, every room you enter carries the echo of that moment. The bold will remember. The crowd will whisper. And silence will follow you, not as emptiness, but as crown. Because silence backed by storms is the purest form of power. That's why they froze. That's why they trembled. And that's why you walk forward. Untouchable, undeniable, unforgettable.